So I think we've done a fair amount of coding without seeing anything live. So let's go ahead and start getting this prepped so we can see it in the browser. There is still more to wire up, but let's at least make sure that everything is flowing the way that it should right now. So we're gonna head to our app.module, and over here in the app.module, we'll need to let our application know about Redux, about our stores and all that. So what we'll do here is in the import, we'll say store module dot for root. We're gonna have any as the type, and we'll say user state is of type user reducer. And we'll also import the store module. You can see this user reducer was defined over here, and this is the one we just worked with, and we're saying, okay, this user state, and if you recall, we added that to our store over here. So it's all starting to come together. Our store contains our user state, right? And this user state is we know the user state by the reducer. So before we run Ionic Serve, we did not add the login page here. So we're going to add that to our declarations. And it'll be also an entry component. And we will go to my app, and the default page, the root page, is not going to be the home page. It's going to be the login page. And now we're ready to go and do an Ionic Serve. All right, so this is our login form, and we'll just hit the console, make sure everything is okay. And we will say, let's do test and test, hit login. So login.ts. Let's make sure it's just going in here, that things are kosher. So username has test, password has test. So it looks like everything is good. So over here, we're dispatching our event. Nothing is happening. That makes sense. We haven't plugged in any other logic. The one thing that we'll do, just as a sanity check, is we'll go into our reducer and see if when we dispatch our action, if we're getting the action over here. Go log in. Well, let's see. Our action has a type of user login, has the password, and it has the username. It's exactly what we're looking for. Now the next step is to call that login function. So we're going to define a user service. We're going to have a login function. And then when the user login action is dispatched, we're going to use something called an effect, which can be thought of as a piece of middleware that's going to call the user service's login function. And then that is going to make the HTTP request and dispatch the appropriate action. So we're going to go back into our IDE, and we are going to go into this directory right here, and we're going to say, okay, we are going to declare our user.service.ts file, and we'll go here, and it'll be of type user service. We'll decorate it with the injectable decorator. And then what we'll do is we're going to go to our app.module. Over here, we'll add that service to our list of providers, and we will define a login function. Take an email of type string, password of type string. It will return an observable. And I am actually, just to not waste time, I'm going to again fill out the rest of this, and we will go through it together. All right, so we have a login function. It takes an email and a password. It returns an observable. You can see here I've defined a JSON response via JSON bin, and we can just see what that looks like. So we'll put this in the browser. So JSON bin. All right, so this is just the response that's going to come back. Email, last name, first name, ID, and that matches to our user model. So what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, this login function returns an observable. It's either going to throw an error or it's going to return the JSON response. So now that we've defined the service, how do we call the service when this action is dispatched. This is where effects come into play. So we're going to go here and user.effects.ts. And again, I will pause the video, fill in the effects file, and we will go through it one line at a time. Okay, so this does look intimidating. However, this definitely does look a little bit intimidating. So let's break it down. We define our class user effects. In the constructor, we have our actions and the user service that we defined before. So this has the login function. And you can see here, we're saying this.actions of type user action types dot user login. What does that mean? That's saying if I can match an action to user.login, I want to go through, I want to capture that action. Okay, we map that action, and then we're saying this.userService.login. So if you recall, this login action has a username and a password. We should probably just be consistent and say email. So over here, we're saying this.userService.login, pass in the email and pass in the password, both of which exist on the login action class. When I get the response, this means that I was successful. This user.service login function was successful. You're going to dispatch an action of type user login success, and you're going to say that the user object is the response. So let's go through that again. If an action of type user login is dispatched, we're going to intercept that. We're going to map the login action, call the login function of the user service that we defined, and if it's successful, we're going to dispatch a login success action, and that is going to have the user as the response. If it fails, so if for some reason this login function fails, then we are going to go and catch that error, and we're going to dispatch a user login error. Now, let's go back to the diagram. What happens when an action is dispatched? It flows through to the reducer. What that means is when we get to either this part or this part right here, we are actually going to go and hit one of these statements in our reducer. And you can see here, if the user login success is the action type, then we are going to return the state, and we are going to update our state with the user, and we're no longer loading. And the same thing here, if it's an error, we're no longer loading, and we say that there is an error, so that's true. So how do we invoke this? Well, by simply decorating it with this effect decorator, we now have an effect that's going, or a piece of middleware that is matching any action that's dispatched that matches this type and executing this logic. So to register an effect with our app, there is one small thing we'll need to do, and over here we will say the effects module.for root, and it takes an array of your effects. So here it's user effects, and we'll import this. So this is essentially how it's registered, just like we needed to register our user state. And because we're making an HTTP request, we will need to import the HTTP module. So we'll do that up here. Okay, so let's make sure everything's in working order. So what we're going to do now is let's see if our effect is executed. So we'll head into the user service and see if we make it here. Test and test. We're not validating the username, which is fine. So we're dispatching our action. We go here, it's of type user login. We made it in here. So that means that our effect did work. Our effect was listening for an action of type user login. and we see here, it looks like it dispatched a user login error. I wonder why that is. Well, okay, it looks like it 404'd here, but that's good. So we know that the actions are working. So let's just see why we got a 404. I'm sure it's something silly. So user.service, and it looks like, well, it's a post. It should be a get, and there should not be any parameters there. So I think we should be good. So now let's try again. So we did the error case, and when this reloads, we should get a success. Okay. And we have a user login success. So everything looks like it's in working order. Everything is flowing nicely in Redux. Our actions are being dispatched. Our reducer is catching those actions. Our effects are working, and so are our services. The next part is to get our components working. So we'll head over here and we'll start with the home page. I'm going to just fill this in, and we'll go through all the details. So if we look at the home page, we have two lifecycle events, the ion view did enter and the ion view did leave. So what we're doing is when we enter the page, we are subscribing to our store. Specifically, we are interested in changes to the user state. And when the user state is populated with a user, we want to update our local variable here. The reason for that is if we go to our home.html, we want to greet the user. When we leave the page, we simply unsubscribe. And the reason for this is, again, we're creating a subscription and we do not want multiple subscriptions on the page. If we head to the login component, we have pretty much the same thing. The difference here is we have this error message. So we're saying if an error is detected, we want to just flip this flag to true so that we can show this error message. And finally, we're saying once we have a user, we know that we can go to the next page. So our state is determining how we're navigating to the next page. So let's go and test this out. All right, so let's go ahead and test this page out. So we're gonna go and log in. I'll do a test and test. We log in and we have gone to the welcome page and it is greeting the user. So this is perfect. This is exactly what we wanted to see. And what we can do is let's just trace it together one final time. So we're gonna go to our user. This happens sometimes, you need to refresh. All right, user.reducer. So I have test and test. I log in. User login is dispatched. My user service is then hit. This user login success is now dispatched from the effect, and that is over here, right? So this was dispatched. And let's also just put a breakpoint in our login.ts file. And we'll also put a breakpoint in our home.ts file. Okay, so we'll play that through. We see that our store has given us a state change, and we have our user object. Loading is false and the error is false. And since we have a user, we're going to push the home page on. And when we get to the home page, we are getting the user from our store. This is our source of truth. The store is our source of truth, and it has the user object for us. And there you have it. So this is how to use Redux in an Ionic application. These concepts obviously will work in an Angular application as well. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. I'll put a link to the source code on GitHub, and I'll see you next time.